Hello, everyone. Thank you for checking out this special episode of Really Dicey. This is Manny, and I am here with Jim Johnson, project manager at Modiphius Entertainment for the Star Trek Adventures product line. And today we're going to talk about Star Trek Adventures Second Edition, the role-playing game core rulebook. I've been internally debating how to discuss this book with you because it's an amazing piece of work, and usually when I do overviews with the writer or editor of a book, I try to hold back, not to seem too what's the word I'm looking for? I try to stay neutral, not seem so biased, but this book is so good, and thank you, Modiphius, for giving me a PDF copy of this to look through. Now we're seeing more of the artwork from not just the older stuff from back then, but also a lot of the newer stuff coming out from Paramount Plus. So first things first, Jim, how are you?
I'm doing well, Manny. Thank you so much, and thanks for having me on the show again. Always appreciate it. Love what you're doing with Really Dicey. Always, I mean, anytime I have lunch these days, I'm trying to put an episode of some sort on, like all the different webcasts and stuff that I've gotten. Consistently watching your show, I just appreciate what you're doing for the gaming industry and for gamers and everything else. So thanks again for having me on the show. Really appreciate it. I feel like it wasn't that long ago when we were starting to talk about I think we talked about the quick start, right? And we were teasing a little bit about some of the blog posts that were coming out, and finally now the embargo has been lifted, and we can talk about it. We can talk about it in more detail now, and I'm so excited to finally get this. I mean, not so much to get it in people's hands, but to finally actually be able to talk about it, right? Like
Yes.
I know you and some of the other reviewers have had it for a little while and have had to go through it, and I haven't heard, I haven't had an opportunity to hear any feedback, and now I'm starting to see it, right? So I'm just super excited that we're finally getting some eyes on this, and that you're able to share it with other people. So yeah, I'm really humbled by your comments initially, and hopefully the fans will react to it positively as well. I think this has been a true labor of love. I mean, really for 8 years now, right? I mean, second edition is built on the super strong foundations of first edition. And in fact, I mean, once you get into it, I'm sure we'll talk about it, you'll see that the game really hasn't changed much at all. I mean, we've done some refinements, we've done some tinkering in the warp core, as it were. We've realigned the crystals a little bit. We took out the challenge dice. That's probably the single biggest change, is we took out the challenge dice, and that had some flow down effects to other parts of the game. But yeah, I'll stop there. But yeah, thanks for the initial comments, and I'm just excited to get in here and talk about it.
So a few things I've noticed right away
Mm-hmm.
with this book. The language is cleaner, straight to the point. Um, the lore, you're now including stuff from Paramount Plus, so all that information, even though it may not be specific from any of the new series that's come out, the stuff, even like stuff like about like time travel, I've noticed, or alternate universes, I've noticed has been expanded because of the new series.
Mm-hmm.
The images you decided to use for this book are much brighter and colorful than the previous books. Of course, a lot of the artwork you're showcasing different eras of Star Trek, but it's I noticed it feels like, and correct me if I'm wrong, I felt like comparing this for the first book to the second for the first edition book to the second edition book, that there's like the first edition book is almost like, hey, we love Star Trek. This is a Star Trek RPG. Let me sit down with you for about 2 hours and tell you about it. Well, this is a more like, all right, I know you play role playing games. I know you love Star Trek. I'm gonna give you the exactly what you need so you can start as soon as you can. It just feels, I don't know, I can't explain it. It just feels very polished and very, it's like almost like every page has really been thought through when it comes to the information you share, the content, and the images as well.
Mm.
Um, am I just imagining it, or what are your thoughts?
No, I think you're hitting a lot of like our design intentions. You're seeing it. You're seeing it, and you're commenting on it, which is great, right? Because that tells me that we did our job 2 years ago when we were putting the initial design scopes together and the design plan for this, and like our intentions and what we wanted to do with the book. and what I wanted to do with the book. I think I'm gratified to hear that feedback from you, because you're like, you get it, right? Like we tried to do something specific, and you're getting it. Like, we tried to make the color palette, and this was a lot of great conversations with my art director Ariel Oria, who's been doing a great job on STA for a few years now. And then this was like the next evolutionary step to say, okay, we're doing a second edition. This is an opportunity for us to level up the game of everything, not just the writing and the editing, but also the artwork. And he and I talked at length about art and what we wanted, and what I really, one of the design intentions that I wanted to do was to kind of get back to that feel that even as a kid I felt when I was watching the original series, right? Like, when you watch the original series, that color palette is super bright, right? The uniforms are vibrant, the hallways are, I mean, they're gray, but they're still kind of cool looking. The food that they get on their trays out of the cafeteria are like colored Play-Doh, and like they're all bold, very primary colors, right? And it's just like color really hits you right in the face. And I didn't want to go back to like other sci-fi properties that are like really dark and moody and very like, claustrophobic kind of, right? Because like Star Trek, in my experience anyway, with the original series and even some next gen episodes, even Enterprise, in some cases, like you get on a planet, it's vibrant, it's fascinating, it's neat, it's cool. There's interesting things happening, and I think Discovery, I think, did a great job with a lot of their planetary environments, really opening things up a lot. And so, I told Ariel, when we were thinking about the art briefs and stuff, I said, let's look at Strange New Worlds, because Strange New Worlds has a beautiful um, production design, right? Like, their graphics and their imagery and their environments are just amazing. And in fact, you'll see the cover of the book itself is actually inspired by the season one Strange New Worlds poster that came out. Like, if you see it, it's got the crew in the front with the ship in the background, very vibrant color environment. We were like, that's the tone that we want to shoot for, is that there's this wide open galaxy to explore, whether you're Starfleet or Klingons or Romulans or something else. There is a really amazing universe to go explore and do something with, depending on what you're planning on doing with it, right? So absolutely, the intention was there from the very beginning to brighten up the color palette. I think that's part of the reason we decided to go with the white pages instead of the black pages, right? I mean, that's something we've been changing for a few years now on the line, but really wanted to cement that in as well. And what was the other thing you were saying? Yeah, the intentionality behind almost every page. I wouldn't say I thought through every single page, but I'll tell you, once we got into layout and then refining the layout, like, because that's always the time consuming part, is like you put all your energy into the manuscript to make the manuscript as clean as possible, and then you get all the artwork, and then you get the design together, and then it all comes together in layout, and then that's when you start getting futzy with all the fine details. It's like, even down into the weeds, where you put a chapter together, and oh, this chapter's half a page over, so you got half a page of text. Do you cut the text? Do you massage the text? How do you make it all fit together? And so, I mean, we spent several months really refining the layout and cutting and trimming and adjusting things just to make it all fit. So in a way, you're right that every single page was looked at really closely, not just in terms of like, is the content correct, but also like, aesthetically, is this working? I don't know, like, I'll be honest, I don't know that we got there 100%. I think there's a couple pages in there that I feel are still there's too much information on them. But as we saw the deadline counting down, it was like, okay, we're running out of time to really super refine this. So we did like I don't know, I don't want to say the 80/20 solution, but I think we got as close as we could. We could have spent another year on this easily, doing even more refinements on it. But there's a certain point where you got to let it go, and you got to get it out into the market, and then just if there's any errata, we'll fix it in errata, and then we'll move on to the next product and continue to build on the line as we did first edition. But yeah, so just in summary, Manny, you caught a lot of the things that we really intended from the very beginning, and I am just excited to hear you say that, because that means we actually got it right, or partially right anyway.
Yeah, it's funny, if you would have asked me maybe 6 months ago, like, hey, is there any flaws with the first edition Star Trek core rulebook? I would say, if there is, not many, very few. But when you compare it to this, it's almost like my eyes are opened.
Hmm.
Not that what I mean by that is it's just interesting how like the images you use, the colors, the design a bit, the tweakness of it was enough to make this like seem like night and day, you know.
Yeah.
And it's funny. I've shown this cover to a few people that I've been for the longest been trying to get them to play Star Trek Adventures, um, and it's funny how like something as simple as a cover or like for the chapter one, the art for chapter one. Again, another great piece of art. And when I've shown this, suddenly their interest peaked. But yeah, I could just go through each art and just talk about how much I love this and love that.
Yeah.
It just works really well for me.
Hmm.
I can't wait for the printed version for this. I
Yeah.
can't wait to see this and show this around. Um, I feel like I'm taking over this conversation way too much.
No, no,
Um,
no, that's all right. I will say that. I don't remember if I was talking to you about it in our last conversation, or it might have been another conversation, maybe on the AMA that we did a couple months ago. Like, and this was early in the marketing spree for second edition, where everybody was speculating what's going to be in the book, right? And I said, well, it's a core rule book, right? It's a core rule book for a new edition of the game. And if you think about RPGs in general, but also Star Trek, if you've looked at the original core book and the Klingon core book and the Rules Digest, and I guess even Captain's Log, there are certain things you have to have in a core book in order for it to be a core book, right? Because the assumption is the core book could be the only book somebody buys and then goes off and has however many hundreds of hours of gaming, because they don't need supplements, right? Or they don't want supplements. They just want one core book and they're done. So one of the early design intentions for the game was that we really, really wanted to make sure we were targeting new gamers and people new to Star Trek, right? So I think this harkens to something that you were saying earlier about the first edition core book, is that with 8 years of hindsight, I think that book was really kind of oriented to existing Star Trek fans, right? I think the Easter eggs that we dropped into there with all the little sidebars of all the history and all the lore and all the character bits, like they're really awesome if you're a Star Trek fan. If you've ingested Star Trek for 30, 40 years or something, some of them are going to be kind of impenetrable to somebody new to the franchise. They'll read a sidebar about, I don't know, Garth of Vizar, and they don't have the context, right? And they're like, okay, that's a neat sidebar, but I don't have the context, right? Um, so we really tried to target this new edition to new gamers, to new Star Trek fans, but also try to give enough cool stuff so that existing Star Trek fans, existing first edition players are still going to get something out of it, right? I mean, it's such a broad. We had so many targets to shoot for. Like, I worry that we had so many targets to shoot for that we were either going to hit a couple and miss a couple, or we'd hit them all, or we'd miss them all. Like, there's always so many variables there that it's hard to figure it out. So we just did the main focus of it. So a core book needs to have certain content in it for it to be a core book. You need some overview, some basic overview of Star Trek. Like, you have to at least give them the basics, a new fan the basics, so that they don't feel like they have to go watch 1,000 hours of Star Trek, because who's got time to do that, right? So I wanted to make sure there was enough in the first couple chapters to give people a taste of what Star Trek is and how is it different from every other science fiction property and space opera property. How is Star Trek different from Star Wars or Firefly or Battlestar Galactica or whatever. Um, a little bit of information about Starfleet, because Starfleet is still the primary focus of the vast majority of Star Trek. Even though you can play other games, still want to make sure we had provided some information on Starfleet. And then because science is so important to Star Trek, either real science or quasi science or technobabble, wanted to make sure that we had a really good primer in there for like just the concepts of how science is handled in the setting. Talking about time travel and planets and wormholes and all that great stuff. So I think like the first, not quite third, maybe the first quarter of the book is all lore. It's like Star Trek, planets, setting, eras of play, and then the science and Starfleet. And I thought it was really important. And we even did this a little bit in the player guide and the game master guide for first edition. And we did this kind of same basic idea for the Captain's Log solo version, where again we were targeting new players, new gamers, new people to Star Trek, to give them that grounding initially, so that they could look at that and go, is this even a game I want to play, right? Is this, are these ideas that are baked into Star Trek as a franchise something that I want to play at the game table with my friends? And that's, hopefully a choice they will say yes to, and then they would continue on, to start building a character and stuff. So yeah, if you look at the first edition core book, or the Klingon core book, or the Rules Digest, a lot of the overall chapters are going to be similar, in terms of like the content. Like you gotta have a chapter on NPCs, you gotta have an introductory adventure, you gotta have a chapter on rules, you gotta have weapons and equipment, you gotta have how to build your character, how to build your ship, like all those basic. I mean, I guess I say basic. All those key components that go into a core book are all here. What I did do though is, as the line editor, was to take all that content and then try to chunk it up in ways that had a really good flow and made sense, so that you weren't necessarily flipping through pages trying to find one rules reference or find a section that explains something. I think one of the criticisms that first edition had was that in a lot of places the rules were kind of spread throughout multiple chapters, and in order to understand something you would have to flip through the book in a lot of different places, and that was a challenge for people, right? Because it just makes it less user friendly to use, unless you've got the PDF and you can search for key terms, right? But we can't assume. I mean, even now in 2024, we can't assume that everybody has a PDF reader and wants to have a computer at their game table, right? A lot of people still prefer the print version right there at their table. And you still got to make the book itself accessible. And this is not just for Star Trek. I mean, this is any RPG book. I've got my share, and I'm sure you do. I can see your shelf. I'm sure you got your share of games that you have that the books are just impossible to navigate because they're just not designed effectively, right? And it's like, okay, what? Where's this rule? And heaven forbid it's some important rule that's like buried in a pile of text somewhere, right? It's like, where is it? And it's not highlighted or it's not bolded or something. Then you got to figure it out, right? But yeah. So anyway, long-winded answer to your comment about yes, a lot of the overarching structure of this core book is very similar to the first core book and to the Klingon core book. But once you get into the individual chapters, I hope readers will find that there's a different flow and there's a different intentionality to how we're presenting the information.
All right, so let's. All right, I spent 20 minutes talking about how much I love this book. That's for those of you that are curious about this book and don't have a copy of this book and curious to know about it. Let's just kind of talk a little bit of some of the basics of what this book offers. Mm-hmm. So I mentioned before, chapter 1, 2, and 3. I believe those are the what's the role playing game and what's the setting sections. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts behind these sections?
Yeah, I think again, even though we were trying to make sure we were inclusive to give new fans and new gamers and people new to Star Trek an opportunity to kind of like get a feel for the setting and for the pieces of the setting, I think experienced Star Trek fans and experienced gamers hopefully will find some nuggets of interesting stuff in those chapters. I think my one of my I don't want to call it a mandate. I guess one of my requests to my writers as they're writing chapters is to like try to pack every page with as many ideas as you can possibly throw in there, even because you never know what random sentence on a page is going to spark somebody's imagination, and they're off and running developing an episode or a character backstory or an NPC or something, right? I think that's our primary job, is to feed as many ideas as possible to gamers and to game masters, so that they can take that stuff and then go imagine something else and do amazing stuff with it. So the more seeds, the more plot ideas that we can throw at people, I wanted to make sure that they were baked into like as many pages as possible. But these three chapters really hopefully provide a really strong foundation for people to say, I don't know about a lot about Star Trek. I've watched a handful of episodes. I don't have the time to go binge Next Gen or DS9 or Enterprise or Discovery or whatever. I just want enough to get started and then go off and play with my friends. I think there's enough in these three chapters to give you an understanding of the setting in terms of like the technology and some of the key concepts about the society and how communications work and how engines work. That kind of nitty gritty stuff that's important to up to a point, as long as it's narratively important anyway. And then enough to kind of grok what Starfleet is all about, and then a really good primer on the science without getting too in the weeds about doctorate level science and technology, because really speaking of Starfleet, right, the vast majority of Starfleet Academy graduates are probably master level of some science, whether that's their primary job or not. Like they are smart because they have a society and the means and the freedom to go learn anything they literally want to, and they're collectively smart, brilliant people. And a lot of us are not, right? Like me specifically, I just didn't have the science when I was growing up. I know a little bit, but when I play a Starfleet character, I can lean into that and say, well, I don't know it, but my character does, and so my character can be smarter than me, and that's how we lean into the game, right? So, but I wanted to give enough of a primer so that even the layman or layperson could say, oh, we're talking about wormholes and temporal theory and string theory. I can kind of passively say it, but you know what? My character's smarter than that, so my character would know this. So I'm going to roll on this task or whatever, knowing that my character has a focus in astrophysics or quantum theory or something, and make it work. So hopefully this first part of the book, and I was intentional about dividing the book into three large chunks, three large parts. And one of the fun things that our design team was able to do was able to color code those chapters. So if you're looking at just the basic design of the book, you'll see that there's a gold section, and there's a blue section, and there's a red section, and that was entirely intentional to help people kind of like get a sense of, oh, I'm in the blue chapter. That means I'm reading about the lore of the setting, and now I'm in the red chapter, which is all about the mechanics, like the operations of it, like how things work and how to build a character, how the rules work, all that stuff. And then the gold section, I think, is the game master section, which is all about running the game. It's advice on running the game, and then NPCs, and then the introductory adventure. So yeah, that first chunk is all setting, it's all lore. If you're an experienced Star Trek fan, you could probably skip it and go straight to chapter 4, which is character generation. But I hope at some point you have an opportunity to go back and flip through the first 3 chapters, because there's just lots of great nuggets in there. And as an Easter egg, or not an Easter egg necessarily, but just as a fun little thing for people to do when you're looking for something to read, Dr. Erin McDonald, the resident Star Trek science advisor for all the Paramount Plus shows, she wrote the vast majority of that chapter 3, which is the science chapter. I asked her to write a series of sidebars in setting that were connected, right? So as you read those sidebars, you'll see that those sidebars actually tell a little bit of a story as we go through all the different eras of Star Trek. Like there's an Enterprise, I think there's an Enterprise sidebar, and then a Next Gen, and then it carries on through Voyager and so on and so forth. So if you're looking for like a meta within the book, right, there's some stories in those sidebars that are worth checking out, differently than how we handled the sidebars in the first core book. But hopefully they'll provide some color and give players some insights about just some of the depth of the setting that you can play with.
Oh, before I talk a little bit more about chapter 1, 2, and 3 real fast, there's something I wanted to share my personal thoughts about these sections. I have to ask, what I know you have a team of writers helping you out with this, and you mentioned a very prominent one just now. Mm-hmm. What other writers? What is your team like? What's your writing team like for this book?
So if you've been following Star Trek Adventures for the last several years, some of the same names will be popping up. Michael Dismuke, Al Spader, Aaron Paulier, Nathan Dowdell. Of course, he's the primary 2D20 system developer at Modiphius. He wrote the vast majority of the first edition core book, and so it's no surprise he wrote a very good chunk of the second edition one, especially most of the mechanics chapters. He wrote the bulk of chapters 4 through 9, right? I mean, it's all rules, it's all mechanics, it's all building a character. Keith Garrett wrote the Starfleet chapter, and then I brought in a lot of other writers to write sidebars and small pieces, and the technobabble charts, the timeline in the back of the book, that I'm sure we'll chat about briefly at some point. So a lot of writers. Fred Love wrote the Chris McCarver wrote the introductory adventure. Fred Love wrote the adventure that's in the quick start. So I've been pulling on freelancers that I've known for a number of years now, but I still had room to bring in a couple of newer writers too. In fact, there's a new writer who contributed some sidebars to the book, and gave him an opportunity, and he did a great job on him. And this will be his first. I'm pretty sure it's going to be his first professional publication. And as an editor, that always is a humbling, exciting moment to be able to say, I was able to give somebody a start in the industry, and then they see where they go from there. So, that's Mike. Mike, I think his last name is pronounced Ashkeway. I may be wrong on that though, and I apologize, Mike, if I got it wrong. You can correct me later. So yeah, pretty very diverse group of writers. I'm very proud of the diversity in my writing team, and I've been building that, for as long as I've been project manager. I've always tried to up the diversity game. Not so much a game, but because it's important, right? I mean, Star Trek is a diverse franchise and a diverse property, and it's stronger when the voices are diverse as well. And you'll see. I mean, you see it in the artwork, but you see it in the writing too. And I think if there's one thing I'm really sad about is, like, there was a couple of writers that I got on the team that unfortunately I didn't have space for all their stuff, right? So there was some stuff that had to get cut, and you'll see that content show up in other places. Like that, we have a series of blog posts coming up pretty soon that will have some writers' stuff in it that I just couldn't get into the core book, but it will be able to reuse in other ways. So you'll see that in coming coming products too, like the toolkit that we've already announced. There's a chunk of content in the toolkit that I could not fit into the core book. And fortunately, we were already developing the toolkit. I was like, well, let's just make that booklet a little bit bigger and just drop this content into there. So fortunately, it wasn't lost completely. So yeah, a great team of writers and editors and proofreaders, and of course the design team, the folks that did the graphic design and layout, and then also the artists too, right? I mean, we had must have had like 15 to 20 different artists working on the artwork in here, in addition to all the assets that we were able to use from Paramount, right? I mean, Paramount's got decades worth of content that we can draw on strategically, and you'll see a little bit of that in here. But by and large, we really focused on new artwork, new content. I think after 7.5 years, a lot of the artwork that we used in first edition was starting to get a little repetitive. I think there was a couple pieces that we used a lot because they were so good. But for a new edition, new book, new core book, it was like, yeah, let's invest in some new art. And you can see that. I mean, this is a good example here. This is the one of the chapter openers, and this art was so good we used it on the cover of the quick start. Because again, it's similar to the core book cover. It's vibrant. It's got a lot of great color. The iconic characters that we developed for the second edition are all on here. So yeah, we were really just trying to set a different tone here, just from the art itself. But you'll see that reflected in the writing as well.
So before we talk about character creation, I just want to say real fast that in chapter 1, I love the errors of play section, because it helps players decide where and when to play Star Trek. Chapter 2, I love that there's sections there, especially about the away team, so that they have an idea of how gameplay sort of works in this game. And especially understanding that, the Prime Directive 2 and what's the mission of Star Trek. But chapter 3, the Final Frontier, I do love the sections about Strange New Worlds and the dangers of space, because especially since sometimes, again, I think we talked about this before, that sometimes when people hear about Star Trek, the role-playing game, Star Trek Adventures, the role-playing game, they think like, oh, is this very cerebral? Is there any action? It's a very political, social game. How does it work? And when you see that section, they're like, oh, okay, there's some scary stuff happening here. So, which can be. I mean, that's what's great about Star Trek. You can make it a very political, social game, and those can be a lot of fun. Dune, for example, is a great. It's fantastic with that. But yeah, I'm just glad that there's information available that I could show new players right away and what the game's all about, especially with something as big as Star Trek.
Yeah.
And now chapter 4, chapter 5, reporting for duty is the name of chapter 4. Chapter 5 is called Your Home Among the Stars, and this is your character creation section. For those of you that are new, Star Trek uses the Modiphius's 2d20, mostly uses that rule system, the 2d20 rule
Mhm.
system, which is basically you roll, well, you find out the difficulty of the task, and you roll mostly 2d20s, and it's reverse. For those of you that play role playing games, it's a bit reverse in the idea that instead of 20s being sort of a critical success and ones being critical failure, it's actually the other way around. You actually add usually two different things. Some games is traits, the others is disciplines. uh, If I'm right
Departments.
about that,
Yeah. Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah,
And
they were disciplines in first edition, and we changed the name to departments to align them with the starships.
ah, and yeah, so you just add the numbers together, and you just roll 2d20s, and you roll under that number. It's very, if you play, it's a very very fun, very basic, straightforward system,
Hmm.
and it's always fun to see when the difficulty ranks go up and them trying to figure a way around a problem mechanically with the dice. Is always a great thing to see. But so yeah, what would you like to say about the character creation process? It seems to me, at least, that it's much more um, straightforward and more direct in their language of like what you can be. But for the most part, especially if you play first edition, the same I think it's 7 steps to
Hmm.
make the character sheet, make the character is still there.
Hmm. Yeah, in fact, if you feel like flipping to that chapter, let me see if I can find the page number, because of course I've got it in front of me. What is it?
85. I'm looking now.
Where's
Looking
that?
at.
Where's that? 98.
Oh, 98.
So 98 is gonna be everybody's friend when they're first creating characters. This is the life path summary. If you choose to go with the life path, right now, just like in first edition, creating a character in second edition, you can either do the full blown life path where you're going step by step, building your character from soup to nuts and doing everything, or you can do creation, play by creation and play, where you just start with the basics and then you discover your character as you're playing. And I'll tell you, after 7 years, I think, because when I first started playing STA back in 2016 during the playtest, and then just playing it as the game progressed, I really liked the life path. Like I think FASA had a life path, Last Unicorn Games had a life path, other game systems and other game genres have life paths. I really like life path as a storyteller and as a player because it allows me to build the character and build stories in from their birth all the way out to their career, right? So I get to really get granular into the totality of their career before I even start playing. But in the last couple of years, I've really kind of started to gravitate toward creation and play, because that emulates Star Trek even better than Life Path, in my opinion, because a Star Trek series starts off as a series Bible where you've got maybe a couple paragraphs for each character. You got some ideas of who they are and what they are. You cast them. You start playing. You start doing this show, and episode by episode, the actors and the writers start adding more to those characters, right? So that by the end of the series, you know, Bashir is a very different character than he was in the very first episode, because there's that whole process of discovery of like, okay, oh, what can we add to make him more interesting? How are the events that impact him going to change him? And so I think that's better emulated by creation and play than it is life path. But again, just my opinion. Um, so we wanted to make sure that both those options were in there. But if you decide to use the life path, what we decided, what I really wanted to do is to lean into the flowcharts, because the flowcharts make things so much easier to understand at a glance, right? I think we experimented with this in Captain's Log and got some favorable feedback from fans, and I was like, okay, let's really lean into this even more for second edition. And in one page, you got the 7 steps laid out right here, step by step. Like you were saying, really clear. Hopefully, I won't pat myself on the back. Hopefully, it's clear language, but we'll see what fan response is. But just go step by step, boom, boom, boom. Here's exactly what you need to do, and here's the page references to go find it, so that you can go, okay, here's your species, here's your environment, here's your upbringing, blah, 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 boom, boom, boom. So that by the end of going through this whole life path, you've got a full blown character ready to go. And hopefully, hopefully your group is doing this together, so that you've all got the book, and you're all working through your life path together, so that by the end of that session 0, you've all got a character and then you're ready to start, the next step, which is, building your ship or station, and then going off and, having your great adventures. um, so yeah, I think I would say, the life path summary is going to be really important, and then you couple that with the earlier chapter about eras of play, and then you look at the selection of character species that are available to you. All those pieces together will help you and your group kind of formulate what kind of Star Trek game do we want to play, and who are we playing in that game, right? Because like you said, Manny, Star Trek is huge, right? I mean, it's a 60-year-old franchise. If you sat 6 people down and said, we're going to play a Star Trek game, all 6 of those people are going to have a very different vision of what that is. And that's why you all need to do that session 0 and kind of come together and say, okay, we're going to do Star Trek. What kind of Star Trek we're going to do? Are we going to do a dark political game? Are we going to do a bright, 5-year mission exploration? Anything's open. Are we going to do, post Romulan supernova, and we're trying to pick up the pieces? Like, there's so many directions you could go with a Star Trek game. Hopefully the tools in this book will help you kind of like narrow that down, so you're focused on what you want to do. And then that ties right into character generation, because like once your group has a sense of like where and when are we going to set our game, who are our characters, then you can go through the life path and start figuring out, okay, you can either use the random tables to randomly roll stuff, or you can be intentional about and pick stuff. Like, if you're going to play a Cardassian game about, empire building, then that would influence your choices through all these different steps. Whereas if you're playing, a new cadet fresh out of Starfleet Academy in the 23rd century with your brand new monster maroon uniform, you might make different choices, right? It just depends on what you want to do. So I think all those different chapters and different pieces really, even though I don't think we really explicitly said these all tie together. I think it was implicit that, like, okay, you think about the era you're going to play, think about what character you want to play, think about what ship you're going to run. I mean, it all ties together into session 0. And honestly, I mean, we could probably spend 100 pages on just running an effective Star Trek session 0. I know we did it a little bit in the player's guide, but there's just so much ideas there to think about for session 0. But again, at the same time, we don't want to overwhelm people, right? Somebody new to Star Trek and who just wants to try it out is going to be intimidated by, here's 100 pages about how to run an effective session 0. That's just a lot, right? Mm-hmm. So we wanted to try to make it accessible at the same time, and that's a delicate balancing act that I hope we hit. But if nothing else, hopefully this flow chart, bottom line, hopefully this flow chart will help at least get some ideas going, and be some good, clear guidance for people as they jump into it.
This page you mentioned, particularly the life path summary, I've already been asked to make copies of it next time we play, because that's just such a really, again, clean cut step through of how to make a character. But,
so chapter 4 is character generation. And you know what was funny, Manny? I was thinking about this. Gosh, it must have been February, when I was deep in the throes of laying out this book and doing all the fine tweaking and everything. It dawned on me that chapter 4 is character generation, and there's a small chapter at the end for character advancement. But like talking about the life path and the species and the talents and the focuses and the values, and just like all the components that go into creating a character. Like, I think chapter 4 is the longest chapter in the book. I think it's like 100 and something pages. And what's funny is, like, once you've done character generation and you filled out your character sheet, you probably won't be looking at that chunk of paper, that chunk again too frequently, right? Unless you need to reference a talent or you need to reference something, because like most of that content, most of the important content will be transferred over to your character sheet. So I just had that moment of like, wow, I've just spent 100 and something pages talking about character generation that theoretically a player would probably only look at a couple times and then move on to the rest of it. It's just like, okay, is that really an effective use of page count here? Because there's so much other stuff I could throw in here. And then I reminded myself that, like, without character generation, you don't have a game, right? Because like, if you can't make a character, then it reminds me of Dungeons and Dragons. And certainly no slight on Dungeons and Dragons, but like when you look at the player's handbooks, like, I don't know, a quarter to a third of that book is spells, right? Like it's just a giant chunk of section, and it's like, what if I'm playing a sword and board fighter, right? I don't need spells. I've just spent $40 on that on that player's handbook, and like I don't even look at a third of it. Like I remember that in second, first edition and second edition, even third edition, because I tended to play, fighters and rogues, and that, like, I never really got into the whole magic side of things, other than once in a while as a cleric. I was like, oh yeah, like I don't even use a third of the book. It's like, because like one of my friends would play a magic user, and they were talking about the spells, and every now and then I'd flip through the book and I was like, wow, there's a lot of spells here. And it's just, I didn't think about it until I was a project manager, to think about like how important page real estate is and how valuable pages are, right? And it's like, oh wow, yeah, I'm just burning a whole lot of pages here talking about talents and focuses and so on and so forth, but it's all important, right? So it's just a funny aside as a game developer that I didn't appreciate years ago, but now I have a all new appreciation for it now.
So yes, chapter 5, Your Home Among the Stars. I think Starship creation process in this chapter is the most, at least for my players, the most exciting thing about these type of chapters.
Yeah.
That seems to be the one thing that in session 0 players kind of fight about, which is interesting. It's not really about the eras or which version of which series of Star Trek to play in. It's more
Mhm.
about what ship we're going to be in and what's it going to
Yeah.
be like. Um, is there any changes per se compared to first edition? Is there I noticed it's like you also have more like these bubble charts. I know
Hmm.
that's a better term for that. More of these charts to help players make easier options or quicker
Hmm.
options, I should say.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So overall, Starship creation has not changed much. I mean, you're picking a space frame, you're picking a mission profile, and then you're picking talents for your ship. We did Nathan added a tweak to differentiate ships a little bit more, by creating an optional thing that you can add to ships called a service record. And this is basically, you pick a concept, a service record, and it gives your ship a modest benefit and a new trait, and that's a permanent. So like maybe you're serving on a ship that's an old warhorse that's been around for decades and has developed a reputation as being, kind of like, the Constitution, the old Ironsides, in the Revolutionary War. It's like this ship has a reputation of being hard to beat in a fight, right? And that reputation carries with it, so that your adversaries may say, "Oh well, shoot! Here comes the Excelsior. We know the ship's history, even if we may not know the current captain, right? We know this ship has a history." And so we added that service record as an optional piece to ships if you want to add it. It's not mandatory, and we did just a few little fine tuning tweaks to like how shields are calculated and how weapon damage is calculated. Of course, partly because we took the challenge dice out of the equation, right? So you're not rolling a bunch of dice for damage. You're doing a set amount of damage plus some bonuses and modifiers, based on like, your ship's capabilities and how much momentum you want to spend, etc. What talents your ship has. Um, but by and large, ship generation has not really changed from first edition, and we really leaned into the Utopia Planitia book, right? Because the Utopia Planitia book just came out a couple years ago, and we were very aware that a lot of people have invested time and money into their collection and did not want to feel like it was being wasted. So you'll find that the space frames in the core book are largely identical to the ones that are in Utopia Planitia, with a few tweaks. So we did take the opportunity to just kind of like take a fresh look at every space frame and say, okay, are the numbers balanced to what we see in canon appropriately? Do we need to move a number here and there? Do some really light fine tuning. We did a little fine tuning, maybe on one or two space frames. You'll find that the mission profiles now actually are a little bit more diverse in that they do provide your department values, but they also add one bonus to systems, right? So we're just trying to add a little bit more um, diversity, so that if two groups both create a Constitution class with or create a Constitution class, there's still enough variety in the options that they'll end up as different ships and not all kind of be cookie cutter, kind of the same. I think Nathan had a good insight that he was worried that first edition ships all ultimately kind of felt the same in some respects, because there's only so many talents and only so many ways to manipulate the numbers. And so we added some of these options into the second edition just to make it a little bit more flexible, so that as you and your group, you create your characters, and then you create your ship. And of course, the ship in Star Trek is almost a character unto itself, because it's where your characters spend the vast majority of their time, right? That's where they live and breathe and play and work and suffer together. And so that the players and the game master hopefully are putting as much thought into their ship as they are into their characters. And so we wanted to provide lots of tools for groups to create a ship that is a true living, breathing thing that they can then go off and do amazing adventures with.
Chapter 6, Technology and Weapons, self-explanatory.
It's interesting because the way we handle equipment in Star Trek Adventures is for the most part, every piece of equipment is a trait, right? It is something that helps you do something more effectively, or if you don't have it, it makes it harder to do things. Like if you don't have a tricorder, it's a little harder to scan things and to study things and to do research. But if you do have a tricorder, then that makes things a little easier because you've got such a great tool in your hands. So it was really tough to take that chapter and know I only had so many pages I could devote to weapons and equipment, and really try to grind it down to the essentials. And I think I managed to get it in like 10 pages or something. But I mean, equipment, there's so much equipment in Star Trek. Like I could have gone on for a for a whole book, right, of technology and weapons and equipment and stuff, but just didn't have the room for it. So we really leaned into traits being important in the game, and equipment traits are really important. So like if you're an engineer, and you've got the right tool for the right job, as Scotty says, then you're in good shape. But if you don't have that tool, then you're challenged a little bit, and then you got to get creative and think about how you're going to do things differently. So yeah, it was a fun challenge to do that chapter, and I think we hit the highlights, and then moved on to the next thing. And I think that's what we had to do. We talked about phasers, we talked about tricorders, we talked about communicators. Those are the essential. I guess those three are the essential three pieces of technology that are used most frequently. Because we could get into the weeds about all the interesting little engineering gizmos and medical gizmos and stuff, and for the most part it's all flavor, right? It's all, not to say it's all fluff, but like Star Trek characters historically have always found a way to come up with an interesting piece of technology exactly when they need it to solve the problem, and then you never see it again. Right? So we tried to lean into that a little bit, just to say equipments are traits, and there are mechanics in the game that allow a player or game master to create a trait or to modify a trait as needed by spending some momentum or some threat. And so if you are an engineer and you're on an alien ship and you've desperately got to fix their warp core, and you need some technobabble gizmo to get it done, then create a trait. There you go, you got it. Or spend the escalation cost or opportunity cost, and you're off and running. And you don't have to put a whole lot of thought into, here's this device, how does it actually work, how does it function in the setting. It's like, okay, I need a wrench, or I need a space wrench, or what do they call it in Star Wars, a hydrospanner. So okay, you got it. Now then you get on with the story, right? So we tried to lean into that a little bit.
Chapter 7, Chapter 8, Chapter 7, Operations, Chapter 8, Conflict. As a fan, I'm really glad you also have you mentioned this already about technobabble. I noticed you also had a page about medical babble, which I thought was awesome too.
Yeah.
I just love, I don't know, I love it when I'm playing Star Trek where we're trying to describe something using futuristic language, and we're just making stuff up, and we always laugh at that. I know that some of the rules have been tweaked a little bit. Anything you want to say about Chapter 7, Operations, or Chapter 8, Conflict?
Yeah, so I think Chapter 7 is the primary operations chapter that pretty much gives you the essentials of the game system. And then Chapter 8 goes into all the different conflict. So the game system, again, is not really all that different from first edition. The big change is that we took the challenge dice out. So the way extended tasks work is different now, because instead of rolling the challenge dice, you are working on a progress track, and there are certain breakthroughs at certain points on that progress track, so that as you progress through an extended task, you get to that breakthrough, something happens, you go to the next breakthrough, something happens, and there's a lot of flexibility in there. So a clever game master can put triggering effects at different points on that progress track, no matter what they're doing. So if you want, some extra bad guys to show up partway through this, extended task, you can just decide, okay, at once the characters have achieved, eight check boxes of success on it or whatever, this thing will happen, and then this thing will happen, and then there'll be a breakthrough. And it's just a way to help the game master kind of like stage things if they want to get, linear like that. They don't have to, of course, but it's just a different way of managing it than we did in first edition, where you had a lot more randomness to things, right? Because you didn't always know what the challenge dice were going to give you, right? And so I think we moved away from that extreme randomness a little bit to try to make it a little bit more, not to say linear, but a little less unpredictable, right? Because I think Star Trek as a storytelling genre and milieu as it is, things happen because it's a plot, right? there's things happen, and it doesn't feel random so much, right? Like, it's not so swingy, right? Like, I mean, I know we've all had our share of experiences in games where we're doing this really awesome scene, we're doing great role playing, and then we roll a critical failure, and just like, what do you do with that? Like, do you just ignore the die result, or do you have a game master who's gonna say, oh well, you did all that great role playing, but you rolled a 1, so sucks to be you. Or you're in the big fight with the big baddie, and you have this great dramatic moment, and you do 4 points of damage, and the bad guy just kind of shrugs it off, and you're like, now we got 10 more rounds of combat to grind through this. So I think taking the challenge dice out is going to, I think, will make things a little less swingy. We'll have to see what the fan reaction is to that. I think because I know some folks love to roll lots of dice, right? And I totally respect that. But I think as an effort to streamline things a little bit and to move things along at a bit of a quicker pace, I think we decided to go a different route with that, and you'll see that in the conflict chapter, especially. And you're right. We did we presented social conflict first in the first edition, I think. I just don't know that it was as strongly emphasized in the first edition, and we really want to put more emphasis on it this time, where Star Trek really is about people, and it's about those social interactions, whether you're doing diplomacy or interrogation or something else. It's ultimately how the people are interacting with each other or not, and then if it then escalates to physical conflict or starship conflict, then those chapters follow on. But Star Trek, I think, really lends itself to more thoughtful conflict resolution by and large, and I think that's actually been kind of reflected in the vast majority of actual plays and commentaries and just fan feedback I've gotten over the last 7 years, is that the vast, well, not the vast majority of the time, but in general, I've been hearing from people that like their groups will get moving toward a conflict that is going to end up in fisticuffs or starship combat, and somehow the characters find the diplomatic solution, or they find the way to talk themselves out of that fight or something, right? And I've even seen it reflected in the games that I've run, where like I know there was one point where my group really wanted to get into a starship fight just to test out the rules and see if they enjoy it. It's like, okay, I did my job as the game master, and I set things up in the story to like lead them toward a space combat, and they still found the diplomatic solution to get out of it. And I was like, I wasn't going to make them do a space combat if they didn't want to, right? But they found a way to do it socially. Like they did a social conflict instead of getting into the pew pew, and that's fine. Hopefully there's still enough rules and ways to do the pew pew if that's what you're in for, which is totally great. But I think Nathan was really a strong proponent that we continue to present social conflict first as part of the rule set, and I had no disagreement in that respect. I was like, yep, that's absolutely that feels like Star Trek to me. That we're talking about the interaction, the people interaction, before we talk about the classic Kirk Fu or the mighty starships facing off with each other.
The last 3 chapters, Chapter 9, Game Mastering, Self-Explanatory, Chapter 10, Introductory Adventure, and Chapter 11, Allies and Adversaries, the NPCs and everything that you'll see that Game Masters can use for for their games.
Mm-hmm.
Again, these three chapters are for game masters to help not only set up their campaigns, but and also a great introductory adventure to help show them what a how a game is run exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I love when the core groups have an adventure at the end, just because it just gives, at least for me, at least a game master an idea of how a game is run and how much time I could put in for certain scenarios.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Anything I know in the first edition you get something similar, except the allies and adversary section is switched with the introductory adventure. It was
Mm-hmm.
very interesting that they decided to do that. I think that's no, because it's I think that's um, I think allies and adversary should be something last for a game master to consider. The adventure
Mm-hmm.
should come first,
Interesting.
and I, at least that's just my theory.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm kind of glad how this is structured. Anything extra or special about these chapters that you wanted to share?
Uh, sure. I think I really tried. Nathan and I really tried while we were putting the book together and developing it. I recall that one of the, and I think we even alluded to it earlier in this conversation, that one of the criticisms of first edition was that a lot of the rules were spread throughout the book, like in a lot of different chapters. There was pieces here and there, and it was sometimes hard to navigate to those different sections, right? And so for second edition, we really tried to be intentional about loading as much of the rule set into chapter 7 and chapter 8, right? So if you read those two chapters together, that is the pretty much the entirety of the rule set, right? So that gave me some freedom in chapter 9 then to give the game master more specific advice on how to manage traits, how to manage extended tasks, and then to put content in there that the players don't really need to know about. Like, is a player going to care how an extended challenge is created? Maybe some of them will, but for the most part, they're just going to react to whatever the game master tells them, right? So I tried to be careful about how we were presenting the rules, and also trying to think about the player experience, where they're not having to flip through a lot of different chapters back and forth, or flipping pages back and forth, right? Try to make it so that they could really just focus on 7 and 8 and leave 9 to the game master. And then the game master, if he needs, or he or she needs the reference to look at chapter 9, great. There's some great tools in there and some additional insight as to how to run the game effectively as a game master, as it should be. So hopefully the game masters will find chapter 9 useful, in terms of the advice that we're providing. I know Nathan put a lot of great advice in there about effectively running the game, effectively using the tools. We tried to put as many examples in there as we could, knowing that a game master is going to want to know, like, hey, so you're telling me about extended challenges, but how does that actually work in practice? And so we tried to put in a lot of examples in the book and in that chapter about like how things can work in your game. Chapter 10, of course, is the introductory adventure. I think it's really important for any game core book to have at least a short adventure in it, in the book itself, so that you can kind of understand what the designer's intentions were. Like, how do they think a game session should be run? How do they think an adventure should be structured? And I didn't want to cut it, because I am, just based on 7 years of data, I am confident that the vast majority of people playing Star Trek Adventures are not engaged in the online communities, right? I mean, just the numbers prove our sales are far beyond the 3,000 people on our Discord channel, right? There's a huge disparity in the number of people that are probably playing the game versus who's talking about it online. And that tells me that there's probably a very large contingent of players who are happily buying books, but they're not going online. They're not going to look for online tools. They're not looking for online downloads. They're not looking for supplements online. They're not buying PDFs. And that told me, okay, I need to put an adventure in the book, so that if you're buying the print edition and you may never buy anything else ever again, at least you have one adventure as a starting point to understand how we think we should structure stories, and then maybe use that as inspiration. So we do have a short adventure in here. The adventure kind of walks people through the game system, and it kind of teaches you as you go. I think that's always valuable, to have it written in such a way that you can kind of like ease into it, and you don't have to feel like you have to absorb 300 pages of a core rule book before you even play the adventure. I hate that, right? Like, I want to get in, I want to get playing right away. And so hopefully, the introductory adventure that Chris wrote, hopefully that'll ease game masters and players into it, and teach you the system as you go, so that by the end of that introductory adventure, you have a good understanding of at least the core mechanics of the game, and then you can build on from there as you go. So that's what I hope. And I thought it was a good adventure too. It doesn't rely on combat. It's a very Star Trekky kind of story, very more socially oriented than combat oriented. There's opportunities for combat, of course, because again, we acknowledge that there are groups that really enjoy that, and that's totally cool. So we wanted to provide some options in there, but we didn't want to rely. We didn't want the solution of the adventure to rely on violence, because that's not Star Trek, in my opinion. And then, of course, Chapter 11 is the NPC chapter that goes into details on how to create NPCs. That, again, geared primarily to the game master, because the game master is the one who's going to probably be doing the bulk of the heavy lifting in terms of creating adversaries and challenges for the players, right? So advice on creating NPCs, and then we provide a slate of sample NPCs from a bunch of different civilizations, and then a bunch of starships that are already statted out as adversary starships that you can use in your game, and then a selection of creatures as well. I think if there is one disappointment that I had about that chapter, is that we just didn't have the time or the room to fit in pictures for every single creature. Like, I think we got Moopsy in there, and we got Tribbles in there, and maybe one other one, but just the way the layout came out, and by that time we were just crunching for pages, I was like, I just couldn't, there wasn't enough page real estate to put in pictures for everything, which is unfortunate, because I think especially the newer fans or people new to Star Trek are going to look at it and say, well, what does a Targ look like, or what does a Mugatu look like, or what does a Berengarian dragon look like? They're going to have to go to the internet and look for it, or just use their imagination, which is probably the ideal solution anyway. But I think if there's one disappointment I have, is that we didn't have the means to put pictures in for everything. Hopefully we'll remedy that in a future product. But for now, anyway, it was a disappointment. And then just a little piece of sausage making for you, just a little behind the scenes goodie, because you mentioned it. You mentioned that you liked that the introductory adventure came before the NPCs. I will be transparent and tell you, literally the only reason the introductory adventure is before the NPCs is because the way we designed the book with the page breaks, and the way we open each chapter with a full page piece of art along with the table of contents, the way those two chapters worked out is that the NPC chapter was one page over, and if it was chapter 10 instead of chapter 11, I had a page that I couldn't reconcile, and just because of the wonders of books, your book has to be an even number of pages in order for the inlays to work correctly, right? So if I left it the way it was intentionally, where we did the NPCs and then we did the introductory adventure, I would have had to have found a way to afford 4 more pages or 5 more pages or something like that to the book. It's like, no, I got to cut it. How do I cut this? And my designers and I went back and forth, like, how do we do that? How do we make this work? Because we couldn't compress the content anymore. And I was like, well, shoot, why don't we just do the easy solution and make chapter 11 chapter 10 and chapter 10 chapter 11? That solved our problem. Right? So I wish I could take credit that I had some bigger plan for it, Manny, but honestly, it was just a matter of like making everything fit within the constraints that we had. So that's the only reason we swapped those 2 chapters, and then we made it work. I wish I could say I was more clever than that, but it was just the 11th hour solution to make it all fit. And fortunately we got it done. So not the ideal solution, certainly, but sometimes desperation breeds inspiration, right?
Buyers will never know that the books they purchase, how the struggles that graphic designers go through to make it work so that they're happy with what they have. It's as someone that's done that for a few decades now. Yeah, I can understand that.
Mm-hmm.
And makes total sense.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So toward the end, last but not least, we got the template for the character sheet,
Mm-hmm.
the character sheet for the ship, and a personal line, which is awesome. I think that's great to have, especially so that players could keep track of what the progress of their character, and just great to have to look back to years from now. And of course, I know most people won't care about this. I do. The index section is great.
Mm,
Nothing annoys me more than having a 300 plus page book and there's no either there's a poor index or there's no index behind
mm,
it. Especially when you're trying to find rules at the last minute. It's
yeah.
always difficult.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
I'm glad you appreciate indexes. I appreciate them too, but having worked with Modiphius for 8 years now, I got a new, fresh appreciation about just how hard good indexing is. I mean, there are people who are hired specifically for their indexing abilities, right? I mean, indexing, doing an effective index is an art form in itself. And like, I've got enough nonfiction on my shelf. Like I'm a big history buff, right? And so like when I read a history book and it's got a 20-page index that's super detailed, it's like I know that somebody put a lot of time and effort into that index. And the unfortunate reality of RPGs is that indexes are usually one of the last things we think about. And by that point we're like, okay, we've got 2 weeks before we have to go to print. We don't have a lot of time, and that there's no way you can do an effective index in 2 weeks. Even though there's great tools built into InDesign and Word and stuff, it's still a huge labor to get it right. And like I think we have a pretty good index in this one, but I know because I've done it for the last number of years. It could have been better. It could have been so much better, but we just didn't have the time. And that's not a knock on us specifically. I think it's just the nature of the industry as a whole, is that there's just not enough time to really do a good index by and large. Now that could sound like an excuse, certainly. But like I have a sense of, like, again, these nonfiction books that the traditional publishers use and hire, those indexers, that they're worth their money. And I think a lot of RPG companies can't afford that level of skill in a compressed time frame, right? So we do the best we can, and hopefully it works. But yeah, I'm happy with that index, and I'm really glad. It was really important to me to get that acknowledgments section in there at the end of the index, and because there's so many people to thank for all the work that we've done over the last 7 years, 8 years, and for the last 60 years of Star Trek. Like, there's just a ton of people that had a hand in this one way or the other, and I wanted to make sure that as many of them as possible were acknowledged. So yeah, hopefully folks like the index, and we'll see what the feedback is.
I'm looking at the back cover of this. How clever that you have the I don't remember the name of the entity.
You're talking
It's
about
like
City on the Edge of Forever,
yes,
the Guardian of Forever, yeah.
yes, yeah.
And
At the back,
Carl tipping his hat.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, clever. Which goes along with the cover showing the different eras of Star Trek in
Mm-hmm.
the front of it. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
that's a story in itself.
Yeah,
Um,
and that was entirely intentional because, and this is just a little behind the scenes peek again. We were developing the cover, and Sam Webb, the former Star Trek Adventures project manager, who's now moved on to other roles in the company, she looked at the artwork, and the initial artwork was the characters all in Strange New Worlds uniforms, and she thought, is there a way that we could represent more of the series on the cover, as we were doing the design and doing the drafts and stuff. And I was like, well, yeah, I mean, how about we try to have each of the iconic characters in a different uniform and try to represent each era of Starfleet, right? And that just led me to think, okay, well, okay, and then the artist provided the sketch with the different uniforms like you have on the cover now. And then my brain, because I'm a writer and a storyteller, is like, okay, what's the story here? Like, why are they all? I mean, sure. I mean, from a marketing perspective, yeah, we've got a cover with all the different uniforms on it. Great, but what's the story? Right? There's no story here, right? And so I talked to Ariel, and I was like, "Hey, Ariel, maybe can you get the artist to put the Guardian of Forever in the background, like on the back cover?" And then thanks to Discovery, season 3 or 4, whatever it was, where Giorgio goes through the Guardian of Forever, right, and off to her next adventure. I was like, oh yeah, let's have the Guardian of Forever, and let's have that character Carl, kind of tipping his hat in the background, so it's kind of unobtrusive, it's subtle, and you have to actually open up the book to see the full cover, right? And I was like, okay, so if we have the Guardian Forever in there, that suggests at least that there's some sort of story happening here that explains why these characters are in all these different uniforms. We don't ever explain why, because that's up to the players in the game master. Like, what's the story? in the book itself, each chapter is introduced by one of the iconic characters. There's a little sidebar that talks about the chapter and gives you a little bit of the character voice. If you read the quick start and you read those character intros in each chapter, you'll see that each of these characters has a little bit of backstory, right? And so you can maybe tie in some of that backstory into what this story is on the cover. Like what's the Guardian of Forever doing? What were these characters doing that led them to go to all these different time periods? Like that's a story that I'd love to hear about. Maybe somebody will write it someday. I don't know. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I think that was just part of the wonders of teamwork, right? Working together as a team. Sam had her input, and Ariel had his input, and I had my input, and we all kind of like worked together, and we came up with this story seed that maybe a game master or a group of players will take and run with. I don't know. It'd be cool to hear about it though if anybody goes for it.
So before we end this, and I appreciate anyone still checking us
So
out. I
watching,
know we're going, yeah, but hopefully you appreciate all the great information we've been talking about,
mm-hmm.
sharing. But before we end this, I'm not going to ask you like what's the next product, because that's kind of silly.
Mm-hmm.
This is just coming out. Actually, the print version won't be out to August, if I heard correctly. So
Yep. We're targeting August, and the next two products have already been announced, but we can briefly say that there'll be a toolkit. It's the Game Master screen and the toolkit. So it's the Game Master screen, a 40-page booklet, a bunch of reference cards, and a double-sided poster map on one side, and the cover art on the other side. But the reference cards hopefully will be super useful. And hopefully the 40-page booklet will be super useful too. It's got some optional rules in it, a bunch of additional space frames, and some other cool stuff that hopefully players and game masters will really enjoy. And then of course, Game Master screen, almost a staple in the RPG industry these days. If you're doing a game, you got to have a screen because everybody likes a screen. Even though I don't use it as a screen, like I don't stand, I lay it down and use it as a reference. I don't like having that barrier between me and my players when we're playing face to face. Anyway, I mean on computer you can't avoid it, but I just lay the screen down as opposed to having it be my little secret fort. Right? I try to avoid that. And then after that, later this fall we'll be doing the starter set. So there'll be a full-blown starter set, similar in some respects to the one we did for first edition, but obviously with the second edition vibe and stuff. And then we've got a slate of products coming out next year that we haven't talked about yet, and just stay tuned for more information on those. And I guess if there's one thing I would say, I've mentioned this on social media, and I'll just mention it to you, just so that the word gets out, is that we're not planning to revise any first edition products. Like all those first edition products are still 95% usable with second edition, so don't feel like you have to sell them, because we're not going to do a second edition beta quadrant book or a second edition operation source book or whatever. Like first edition is first edition, still usable in second edition by and large, and any new products we develop for second edition are going to be new products. They're not going to be rehashes of something we've already done. They're not going to be reskins of something we've already done. It's all going to be net new. So hopefully that gives gamers confidence that the money you've invested in first edition will not go to waste, and you're not going to be buying books that are full of regurgitated content. Right? We were intentional about wanting to do net new stuff, and so look forward to new stuff. Heading into second. As we continue through second edition.
Jim, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about this. And this is a fantastic book. I can't wait for the printed copy.
But Manny, thanks so much for having me on the show again. Really appreciate you. I appreciate everything you're doing. I'm excited that you enjoyed the book. I can't wait for other folks to get hold of it too and enjoy it. And like you, I cannot wait to see this in print. I as of the time of this recording, the print proofs are on their way to me. I have not seen them yet, but I did get a copy of the quick start in print, because we printed up a few copies for to support Free RPG Day, and that was just a taste of what this is going to look like in print. And I'm really excited. I can't wait to get the actual book in hand. That's always the button for me on any project, is like, it's always kind of like conceptual until I actually get that physical book in hand. It's like, oh, now it's a thing, right? Now it's a real thing, and I can't wait to see what it looks like in its full. Was it 384 pages? So I can't wait for that brick to land on my table because I'm going to be so excited when it finally gets here. So just like you, I can't wait to see it in print. Much less the limited editions, right? The leatherette ones we did for the 3 division colors. I can't wait to see how those come out because I haven't even seen pictures of those yet in print proofing yet. And I'm excited. It's like, oh, this is the fun part. Is like the book is done, now it's being printed, and at some point it'll come its way, to our hands, and then we can get our hands on it and smell the ink and all that great stuff. Because I know we've talked about that before, where you get that new ink smell when you crack open a book, and you're just like, oh yeah, it's a thing. And yeah, I'm excited. So hopefully it'll be well worth the wait here for everybody.
Yes. And real fast, Star Trek Prodigy Part 2 or Season 2
Yeah,
is
season
coming
2.
out on Netflix. Coming out, I believe, July 1st. Go support it. That's a great show.
Yeah.
And yeah. Again, everyone, thank you for watching. Stay safe out there. We'll see you next time.
All right, be well, everybody. Take care. Thanks, Manny.